Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Fortean Wins podcast. I'm your host, Rom X, and I'm here with my co-host, Bones. Today we're going to be telling you a little bit about the Kelly-Hopkinsville Encounter of 1955. We'll also give you a little bit of in the news and follow it off with a Fortean media review. So let's kick it off by heading back to August 21st, 1955 at the Sutton Farm near Hopkinsville, Kentucky. On that evening, a man named Billy Ray Taylor went out to a well to get a drink of water when he heard a metallic hiss, and he looked up. He saw a flying saucer. The saucer was metallic, and it passed right over him and the house. Billy Ray went back in the house to tell everyone, there were 5 adults and 7 children in the house, what had happened, and they didn't really believe him. Billy Ray was something of a character. He would later go on to embellish this account and cast some cold water on the veracity of it, although Billy Ray was the only one to do so. So when he ran back into the house to tell everyone he'd seen a flying saucer, we can understand why they didn't really believe him. Yet an hour later, the people in the house started to see strange creatures appear outside of the house. They described the creatures as something looking like a cross between a man and a monkey. The creatures stood about 3 feet tall, maybe a little higher, and they had big floppy ears, which is why I think this case tends to get a lot of attention. They looked a little bit like goblins, and that's why it's known as the Kentucky Goblins Encounter. Several of the men went out to investigate, and they found these creatures floating around the house. They had shotguns, and they proceeded to shoot at them. They said the creatures would fly backwards, do a backwards sort of somersault, scurry away on all fours, sort of like an animal. They would come back and float back towards them. At no point did the creatures enter the house or harm one of the people. The closest it got to harming anyone was when they were out on the porch and a clawed hand came down from the roof and attempted to grab one of the men. The family stayed inside for hours, fearing that they were under attack from invaders from outer space. They finally made a break for it. All 12 people piled into the car and headed down to the police station. There they gave the police officers a wild account of what had happened. Then about 12 police officers and 4 military police officers drove out to the Sutton Farm, where they found evidence of the gun battle, but they didn't find any evidence of extraterrestrials or otherworldly visitors. This case was researched extensively because it happened almost 70 years ago. There is a mountain of evidence that says this case happened, but it also began a few important tropes. Billy Ray Taylor became the stereotype of the country bumpkin who gets attacked in the wilderness and makes a bunch of wild claims about aliens. It also began the little green men idea, and overall this account interests us from the Fortean perspective because, for one thing, their appearance was of goblins, and the second thing that really interests us from the Fortean standpoint is how absurd this case is.
Yeah, those absurdities, let me tell you, they're intriguing because I really like this story of the Hopkinsville Encounter because it's just the level of detail that these folks gave the authorities, but also because it's just kind of the groundbreaking encounter when it comes to the kind of country bumpkin stereotype that came across these green goblins or green aliens, and you know they had to wrestle around with their own thoughts and their own. I mean, it was like a whole family, right?
Yeah, there was children, there was multiple adults in the house, and it was the mom, the maternal grandmother who or you know the matron of the house that people were most impressed with as a witness. But they all saw him. They all saw that they had a silver sheen to them.
Right.
And some of the men thought that they were wearing armor, which I thought was interesting. So when when the shotgun hit him, they said that one of the men said he heard a metallic ting. It sounded like he had shot a metal bucket.
Huh.
Yeah.
And then they did some kind of acrobatics after that, right? Or flipping around.
Yeah. That was another unique thing about this was the movement that they described, a flipping motion, you know, a somersault.
Right.
I guess a backward somersault would be the best way to describe it. And then, you know, scurry away on all fours or float back toward them. So the idea that a species that's so advanced that they could come here, that they're humanoid in shape, that they are smarter than us in terms of their technology, and this is how they choose to communicate, and they act like some form of amoeba.
Right.
It doesn't really make sense. And that's the absurdity of the encounter. I think had an important impact because first of all, the absurdity allows people to dismiss it easily. And that's what they did. There was a number of experts called in, and someone blamed it on one of the professors blamed it on a great horned owl. And
yeah, right. Sure.
Similar to the Mothman case, where the witnesses who saw this thing are just like, this is nowhere near an owl or a heron.
Right.
So the idea that somebody who is a professor at a university in another location from the event can determine what it is based on an eyewitness account in these encounters, in both encrypted encounters and in UFO pilot encounters, I think it's if you ran into something that was this bizarre, you're either lying, you're crazy, or you're telling the truth.
Right. And let me tell you something. So these guys are this is the quintessential scenario. It started all when it comes to the stereotypical country bumpkin. Seeing aliens and yelling, "Hey, I see aliens!" They know what a great horned owl looks like. I mean, they were fetching water from a well, weren't they? They know their surroundings, and I think they could tell a great horned owl from something else better than most.
These good old boys from the hollers of Kentucky, can spot tracks. Can spot a creature in the dark and have a good idea of what it is. The idea that they're full of it, is a convenient out, and I think that gave people a convenient out. And there's a question here. I think the question for me is not whether or not this happened, because as we point out on the website, there's a bunch of evidence here. There's a very long report, a 200-page report. If I'm remembering their names correctly, it's Isabel Davis and Ted Blocker who published that, and it's extensive. And their conclusion was that this incident happened. So that's not a question for me. The question is why. And I believe that this is the same phenomenon that shows up looking a lot more sophisticated in other places. Even abducts people at times, and we'll talk about some of those cases. And in those cases, it's communicating. It's telepathically communicating. It's operating on them. And in this case, it shows up as little green goblins, right? Who float across. And the question is why? Like, are those different entities that are engaging in different behaviors? Is it a different entity that's controlling them, and one of them is playing with us, and the other one maybe is kind of mean? These are the questions that I have. I don't. What I think it also points to is, again, when we look at this case as being both absurd and true, it points to the idea that this phenomenon is something a lot bigger than just another species.
Right.
Just another physical species that is the same as us in some way. And the fact that it's humanoid bipedal, which will come up a lot. All of these different, in the cases of abductions, the different entities that have been reported are reptilian, praying mantis, greys. Alien greys are the big favorite.
The big one, though, in the 50s, wasn't it the little men? Not necessarily green men, but the little men. That account came out of Roswell too, right?
Yeah, there was. I think there were reports of the people who saw the bodies.
Oh yeah, and we have this phenomenon where you have the small men, and years before this incident, you had there's an account from Roswell also said that they saw small men, right? They were like 3 feet tall or something like that.
Yeah.
And so my question is, when I was reading about this incident in Kentucky, is that the response seemed pretty big, right? I mean, didn't they had federal officers there at some point, didn't they?
Yeah,
Or
they
National
had.
Guard?
Well, MPs. MPs came out
Okay.
from Fort Campbell,
Right.
so there was a military presence.
So I mean, if they sent a military presence for every country bumpkin that was shooting a shotgun at something,
Fair
that'd be
point.
a full-time job.
Yeah, the military at least took it seriously enough to send people out there.
Right.
And Roswell was 1947. This was 1955. So it was 8 years after. And yeah, the reports of the bodies at Roswell definitely bear some similarities here. I think what was really unique about this case and what grabs a lot of people's attention is those big floppy ears. We put witness description pictures on the website, and they're very similar to, this is where we get into the whole Fortean piece of it, because we, in the Fortean realm, tend to believe that these things are connected, and they go back a long time. So the description of the creatures and the sketch of the creatures looks very much like what you would see a hobgoblin or some other form of fairy creature depicted as in medieval Europe.
Right.
And I don't think that that's an accident.
Right.
One of the researchers we're going to talk a lot about is Jacques Vallée. He's an astronomer, physicist, and entrepreneur. He's a very credible UFO researcher and scientist who garners a lot of media attention. And this is something that he's spent a lot of time on, is proving that connection between UFOs and things like fairies. And it even made its way into the government report on what people have encountered. Fairies make their way in there. So the government at least takes it seriously enough.
Right.
And I think that they're 100% correct. And that really speaks to how old this phenomenon is.
Right.
Going back to at least reports of fairies. And reports like that go way further back than that. And this isn't the only form that this thing takes. So whatever this is, it's been around for a long time. And that might be a good segue to our In the News.
Oh, there you go.
Because in the news this week, we have lots of balloons showing up that are causing a lot of UFO discussion. As of this recording, there's been 4 balloons that have been shot down over U.S. and Canada. None of them, except the one that was shot down originally, which is recovered, was identified as a Chinese spy balloon. Right. The other 3 are not recovered, and as of today, they're not going to bother recovering that debris.
Seems like it. Yeah, so we've only had a visual from one, right? The initial balloon.
Right. The one over Montana, which I almost remove because we have seen what that one looks like, and it was it was most certainly a balloon.
Right.
But the secrecy around these other 3 objects is odd, and it's causing a lot of UFO discussion.
Right.
And these objects that were shot down very well may have been balloons. We don't have any evidence that proves otherwise at this point. What we all have, those of us who research the subject, and I think the public in general on this subject, has a complete mistrust of the Department of Defense when they tell us anything about this.
Right.
And that's a big problem.
Yeah, I think there's silence. Having the first one, which was obviously, it was a giant balloon with giant solar panels on it. And so they were able to provide some visual evidence of that. And everyone's like, okay, that's what it is. And then some other stuff came up, and we didn't get any visual evidence. We got nothing but radio silence. There was just complete silence over it, to the point where I think the White House press secretary had to actually come out and say, listen, folks, it's not aliens. We just aren't going to tell you what it was.
Yeah, both the press secretary and the NSC coordinator have said that. But I think we all know that if you've been lying to us about this for 80 years,
right,
You wouldn't tell us if it was true. And in this case, again, I have no reason to believe that they're not telling the truth, other than their history of lying, which I think is maybe the real story here, is that they've been lying about UFOs and UAPs for so long that here's a situation where these objects were likely benign, and they're telling everybody, hey, these were benign and we shot them down, and everyone says, I don't believe you.
Right.
Because you've lied about things like Roswell for so long, for 80 years. And if you take a good look at Roswell, it's very clear that the government is lying about that. And that we'll do another episode on that, but that's really our position. The evidence is very strong that they recovered some sort of crash and bodies.
Right.
Another interesting thing about these balloons is that they've caused a lot of discussion to happen around UFOs, UAPs, sensor data, because now, because of UFOs and UAPs, partially, the sensors on these aircraft have been recalibrated. So they're picking up a lot more objects, and these very well may have been some ordinarily benign balloon things that they're now picking up because they're looking also for anomalous objects.
Okay. Their sensors were set to just pick up things that were going certain speeds at certain altitudes. Is that what you're saying? So now it's kind of a wider spectrum of what they're looking for now.
Right. And I think even on a level of detection, on a level of visual detection, I think they're widening, if they were, and I don't know any details on this, but if they were looking at one area of the infrared spectrum, for example, now they're expanding it.
Right. Oh, so, I mean, not to just go way off topic, but when it comes to activity and the current, government has somewhat shown some openness to be more transparent when it comes to this kind of stuff. What will happen? Because we know that we're not in a Cold War right now, but we have superpowers where tensions are getting higher between them, right? And I'm talking about Russia, nuclear powers, Russia, China. Russia could be the
North
new
Korea.
Cold War. Yeah. And will these sightings start to reappear again as those tensions get higher? I don't know, just throwing it out there.
It's a great question. These things have certainly been seen a lot over war zones. There's a lot being reported from the Ukraine. Some scientists there reported a very interesting paper. They actually published a paper on UFOs and UAPs that were appearing over their observatory. And I think Avi Loeb, who's the Harvard Chair of Astrophysics, and he's in charge of Project Galileo, which is going out and trying to find UFOs and UAPs for the public. He had some questions about how they had gathered the distance of the objects.
Okay.
I don't think that those are verified, but there are a ton of verified footage, pictures, all from war zones. For some reasons, UFOs and UAPs seem to be drawn towards war zones. Some of the theories are my leading guess would be that it's the energy that's being transmitted at a war zone.
Right.
And that seems to be the common factor because they're attracted to nuclear power plants, they're attracted to nuclear missiles, they're attracted to power plants in general they're seen around. It seems like volcanoes, the common...
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's
interesting.
A huge, long history of UFOs and volcanoes, even flying into volcanoes.
Oh, wow.
A lot of Mexican footage. Footage of a volcano in Mexico where they're seen all the time.
Wild.
Yeah. So to me, the common factor there is energy.
Right.
And that may be why they're hanging around these war zones.
Well, we'll see. Maybe the government will be more transparent because there's a lot of interest in it, and there's some leaders in DC that are advocating for more transparency when it comes to this kind of stuff. Will it happen, or will it just be the typical 10, 20 year delay, and we might hear about it
The stone wall. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think as far as these balloon objects go, I have a feeling that story is pretty well dead. But I think what it did cause was those people you're talking about, those senators and those congressmen, have been saying some pretty ominous things that are UFO and UAP directly related during this balloon event. Senator Richard Blumenthal was on record the other day saying that Joe Biden needs to come out and be honest and tell the American people and treat them like adults and tell the American people the truth.
Oh, right on. Okay.
That's a senator. And there were multiple. Senator Cornyn said something to the effect of lock your doors.
Yeah.
So these are people in government that started to ask hard questions.
Right.
And I think that ends up getting a little political because whichever party is not in power is going to start demanding answers from the party that is and making it look like the sitting party is holding the information, which quite frankly they are. Whoever's sitting in the chair, they are. And you're going to sit in the hot seat and you're going to have a bunch of people saying, we know you're lying about this. And the interesting thing another interesting thing that came out of this balloon story is one of the numbers that we track a lot on Fortean Winds is how many people believe UFOs are otherworldly. And they usually frame that question, do you believe some UFOs are extraterrestrial? And I want to point out again, it's a little early to jump to the conclusion that they're extraterrestrial. Other than human, I think, is the way we'd like to start here. So 51% of the public now believes that these were somehow otherworldly objects.
Really? Wow.
Which is the highest I think it's ever been.
It has to be. Yeah.
The majority. We finally have a majority of people believing in UFOs. And the leading reason is because people being more serious people taking it seriously.
Right.
These are all scientists. And to bring this all back home to the Hopkinsville encounter, you went from Billy Ray Taylor telling me saw little green men and making stuff up. Apparently, he was the one who went off and made
kind of a sideshow out of it.
He was the one who went off and made a sideshow out of it, which made it look like a scam. But the rest of the family, the Sutton family, were all very credible, didn't make money off of it, really wanted, and that's when we talked about this before, looking at this in 2023, since that encounter, we have 70 years almost of time that's elapsed. So we know what those witnesses did since that encounter and whether their behavior indicated that they were lying or hoaxsters or pranksters or not. And we know that in the case of everyone except Billy Ray, that wasn't the case.
Right.
So to have people much more credible in today's world, to have leading scientists, researchers, and even members of the public who are just credible talking about this, and journalists talking about this, it's really changed the conversation. And I think the Department of Defense is running out of places to hide. There was a memo passed, the Gillibrand memo. Senator Gillibrand from New York has been leading an effort to open up the floor to UFO whistleblowers so they can come in free of reprisal, and they can talk about what if they worked on crash programs, if they worked on body programs. And that has now been 2 months, and I think people are starting to come forward. And I think if you haven't come forward, people are probably going to expect accountability. Once people realize they've been lied to, and I think that the people who will be most upset are going to be those people in the 49%. I think those people are going to really want accountability for having this secret having been kept from them.
Right.
And I can
Well, who knows?
sympathize with that.
Right.
I can sympathize with that.
Yeah, I hear you. And to go back to the absurdities, how we started this segment talking about that. Will they continue? I don't know. I always think of Hopkinsville because they have it's a small town. I think it's called Kelly-Hopkinsville.
Mm-hmm.
They have a fair every year where they celebrate the Green Goblins, and they have a little event like a carnival and all that, and people dress up. And down the road, that was small town America. That was the golden age of small town America. Maybe in the future it could be an economic development scenario where small towns will want to find UFOs and have their own fair. Bring in some revenue.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time that a newspaper or a small town has lied about a UFO encounter.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and that's what makes looking at some of the 19th century newspaper accounts of UFOs so difficult.
Yeah.
Is that those papers were trying to outdo each other at the time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But I wonder the public perception, because back then they were happening a lot, right? In the 50s, during the height of the Cold War, the post-war era, everyone was learning to duck and cover in their classrooms, and then suddenly all this info starts coming out about UFOs, and they seemed comfortable with it. Some parts that you read about, they seemed comfortable with it, and especially when you see like a small town in Kentucky that's just kind of like having a fair and having a good time about it. So
that's a good point. Is at that time it was the Cold War, and it was the heart of the Cold War, or this maybe one of the scariest times in the Cold War.
Sure, yeah.
And we had nuclear bombs, and no one really had the regulations and treaties in place to deal with any of it, and people didn't know if they were going to get blown up or not.
Right.
And it was during that time that that it started appearing this way. So Jacques Vallée's theory is that it has changed. It was appearing as a fairy before when people were big into the natural environment, but now we sort of are obsessed with technology and we worship technology. So now it's coming down in something resembling a flying saucer.
Right.
And it changes with time.
It reminds me of years ago, I had a anthropology professor who equated UFO sightings with angels, and the function that cultural function that angels played, where they're giving this ray of hope to people from the sky, and if that was part of it in the height of the Cold War, they heard about this phenomenon and they wanted to believe in it. Maybe
that's right. So John Keel and Jacques Vallée have very similar theories. They're usually mentioned in the same breath. And Keel was a big inspiration for the Fortean Winds website. And he was accused of trying to start a new demonology. Because when he describes some of these creatures, like what occurred in the Mothman, if you're looking at something that's interdimensional, so if you're looking at something that can change form, it can also materialize matter, it can read thoughts, it can also see the future and the past. You're talking about something that previously we've only ascribed to religion, and we've been calling an angel or a demon.
Right.
So when you say that exists, you're inevitably, both by religious people and the academic community, going to be called a heretic.
Right.
And it may not be your professor may not have been very far off, I think, by saying that they're the new angels. Vallée's theory is that some of the events that were ascribed to angels were UFOs.
Oh, okay.
One of the events that he uses to point this out is, if you're familiar with the story of Paul on the road to Damascus in the Christian Bible, he's on the road to Damascus and he's hit by a ray of light.
Okay, yeah.
Paul on the road to Damascus, and he's overwhelmed by this light, and Vallée says, well, what if that's a UFO? And you can sort of see where Vallée's theories have given birth, or at least given some scientific credibility to these ancient aliens theories. Because if you watch the ancient aliens shows, they often just replace religion with, well, what if it was aliens?
Right.
So I think it becomes almost too convenient, and unless there's something there that specifically says, okay, this may have been a extraterrestrial or interdimensional or otherworldly presence, unless there's something specific there's no real reason to go around to people's religions and say, oh, that didn't happen that way, that happened in the UFO way.
Right.
Unless there's real evidence there, I don't see a reason to do that.
Right. Well, I do like I like the connection between the goblins and then the hobgoblin, because there is, I think the lore of the hobgoblin is that it was a mysterious figure, small man that would hang around and, like, I think help with certain things, right? Wasn't that the lore? I'm sure there's a lot of folklore that have different descriptions of it, but
yeah, there's a lot of different fairies have it, and this is interesting. It's very much like the Muslim legends of the jinn, where fairies kind of have different motivations, and people have said, oh, there's tribes of them and they interact with them, and then others say they come and they steal things from their house, and
interesting.
They seem to be different.
Yeah.
And interact with humanity in a different way in fairy lore and in the Middle Eastern lore of the jinn. And there's some other stories in Japanese folklore, kami, very similar to the fairy myths.
Well, right on. That's pretty cool. So why don't we take this opportunity to wrap that segment up, and we'll go right into the Fortean film review.
Right on. So this week I thought we'd start out with the one film that I have no problem recommending to anyone, which is The Phenomenon by James Fox. And you just watched that one, didn't you, Bones?
Yeah, I did. I watched that one. That's a good... I thought that was kind of a good overview of all the different events that occurred. And 'cause I needed a good recap.
Yeah, it's a great recap of all the biggest cases, I think, in UFO history. What I like about recommending that film is that I'm familiar with every case that they talk about in that film. I'm familiar with all the footage. I'm familiar with the incidents that happened at the schools. And I 100% am sure that they all occurred. So when people ask me about UFOs and they have no clue on the subject, I say, watch this film. It's only about an hour and a half long. It's super slick production. It has beautiful editing, which you do not find with a lot of paranormal documentaries.
Right.
And so it's super slick production, and the research and the evidence that they provide is very accurate. Yeah,
very cool. Yeah, I found it easy to watch. It's also available at a lot of different. I mean, you can find it on almost any of those TV apps that provide free films and all that in TV. So look that one up.
Check that one out. There's tons of places streaming it for free right now. Well, thanks for sticking around with us for episode 2, and we hope you stick around with us for episode 3. I think we'll talk about Havana Syndrome.
Nice.
Well, it's not really if you have it.
It's not nice. You don't want it? No. Yeah. It's a super interesting topic, though.
Right on. Talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you soon. Thanks.